There's something happening inside the moon, something that nobody expected. Not a dramatic shift you'd see on the outside, but deep down, where things seem frozen in time, scientists have uncovered a hidden layer of what you could only call moon goo. Remember those school lessons about the crust, mantle, and core? Much like the Earth, the moon is made up of layers: a crust, mantle, and core. However, the moon's core is much smaller compared to ours. Earth's core is huge. It makes up about a third of our entire planet's mass. The moon's core makes up only about 1 to 2% of its mass, and its diameter is about 1/5 the diameter of the moon itself. It's surrounded by a hard, rocky mantle. But it turns out that between these two layers, that mysterious goo layer, and it's way more important than you might think. The layer is soft and partially molten, ebbing and flowing like the tides in our oceans. It rises and falls, stretching and shifting as if it were alive. Its movement isn't chaotic, but subtle and regular. We always knew that the moon influences our seas and oceans, causing tides with its gravity. But it turns out that we influence it back. The goo ocean reacts to the gravitational dance between Earth and the Sun. Also, the molten layer could be made of ilmenite, a very intriguing material. Ilmenite is rich in titanium, a strong and lightweight metal that we really love over here on Earth. Titanium is used in everything from airplane parts and spacecraft to medical devices, even in everyday items like bikes and laptops, all because it's incredibly strong and very resistant to corrosion and heat. So, if the moon might have a molten layer rich in ilmenite, that would be awesome. Astronomers are already planning for lunar bases, and if we had a material to build structures, spacecraft, or even tools for astronauts right there, that would be a game changer. Otherwise, we'd need to transport materials from Earth, which is extremely costly. This is our first tangible sign that the moon is not just a cold, boring rock. Instead, it's dynamic, living, and breathing, with moving forces beneath the surface. NASA used new special tools to discover this: the Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory and the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. These are both space missions designed to study the moon, but they don't just look at the surface like a telescope. Instead, they help measure things we can't see with our eyes, like the moon's gravity and how it changes over time. Grail sent 2 small spacecraft around the moon named Ebb and Flow. Clever. The idea was for these spacecraft to fly close to each other and measure tiny differences in the moon's gravity as they go. It's like they were feeling the moon's invisible pull in different places. If the moon's gravity was stronger in one spot, the spacecraft moved closer together, and if it was weaker, they moved farther apart. This helps scientists understand what's going on inside the moon, even if they can't actually go there. And the spacecraft intentionally crashed into the moon in December 2012 to end the mission. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter is a bit different. It takes super detailed pictures of the moon and collects other important information about its surface. By combining the information from both Grail and LRO, we were able to find this goo layer. But this discovery actually challenges everything we thought we knew about lunar geology. How did this molten layer get there? How long has it existed? And perhaps more fascinating, how it stayed warm for millions of years. That's some million-dollar questions. The moon's core generates heat just like ours. But it's not as easy as saying, oh, the core's heat probably keeps it warm and molten. Well, first, the moon's core is much smaller and less active than Earth's, meaning it produces significantly less heat. Plus, the moon is much cooler than Earth in general. With temperature dropping to minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface, how could this inner layer still stay in this flowing state? That's still a mystery. In any case, this goo could actually explain a lot of stuff about the moon. For example, astronomers were exploring moonquakes and how they happen. Now they think that it might be this semi-molten layer shifting and moving beneath the surface. Now, beyond the moon itself, it also tells us more about other celestial bodies. If the moon, something we considered basically a huge static rock, has such a dramatic life, what about other planets, moons, or asteroids? Could they also hide similar hidden movements beneath their surfaces? We can even understand our own planet better, learn more about how tides and similar stuff works. There are so many great discoveries we've been making on the moon. Recently, we found some awesome stuff beneath the surface, massive caves hidden for millions of years. For over 50 years, scientists have suspected that the moon's surface is full of underground tunnels and caves. These are known as lava tubes because they were formed by lava. Duh! Millions of years ago, the moon was pretty unstable. It underwent some volcanic activity, causing eruptions. When a volcano erupts, lava can flow across the surface. As the outer layer of the lava cools and hardens, it forms a solid roof of dark material. It's actually what these famous dark spots on the moon are. These are dark, hardened remains of ancient lava. But the hot, molten lava continues to flow through the center. Once the eruption ends and the lava drains away, what's left behind is an empty hollow tunnel, hence a lava tube. On Earth, we have lava tubes in places like Hawaii or Iceland, where volcanic activity has created similar underground tunnels. The same thing happened on the Moon billions of years ago, although they're much crazier compared to ours. In fact, lunar lava tubes are now thought to be some of the largest and longest in the entire solar system. One such cave was discovered beneath the famous Mare Tranquillitatis, the place where Apollo 11 first landed, and it's at least 340 feet deep. Now, all these lava systems have remained hidden just beneath the surface, untouched for millions of years. Only now, they finally managed to prove their existence. Scientists from the University of Trento in Italy found them using special radar technology and advanced computer methods. These techniques let you see underground by sending radar waves. The waves bounce back and give clues about what's hidden underneath. By analyzing the way these waves reflected back, the researchers could detect the shape and size of the hidden caves. Now, the best thing about this discovery is that we could build all our bases there. These caves protect from radiation, harsh winds, and meteoroids. NASA even found evidence that some of these caves stay at a steady 63 degrees Fahrenheit. That's some crazy coziness for the moon. And on top of that, there could even be some water there. So humans could take shelter inside these natural tunnels and build entire colonies on the moon. And I know what you're thinking. Could unexpected lunar monsters hide deep in those caves? Well, sure. There's a huge potential for exploring these caves and finding some awesome stuff. But even if we manage to find a miracle, like small life or microbial organisms, there's a 99% chance that there won't be actual animals or monsters. It would just be impossible for them to develop in such conditions. But it would make a great horror movie. Researchers want to send robots or drones to explore the tunnels first, and then see if they're safe enough for humans. And it's not just the US getting in on the action. China is also investigating the possibility of using these moon caves as a future base, showing that the race to explore and settle the moon is heating up.
What if our moon was hollow? Would we be able to hide inside in case some terrible catastrophe destroyed our home planet? Well, the supporters of the hollow moon theory believe that it's actually a real option. The hollow moon is a hypothesis claiming that Earth's moon is either completely hollow or has quite a lot of place inside. The thing is, the moon is less dense than Earth, and it seems to support the idea of its hollowness. But according to science, the reason is the fact that Earth's upper mantle and crust are less dense than the heavy iron core of our planet. Then, there's also the claim that the moon rings like a bell. For almost a decade, between 1969 and 1977, seismometers installed on the moon by the Apollo missions kept recording moonquakes. The moon was reported to be ringing like a bell during such quakes, especially shallow ones. On the 20th of November, 1969, Apollo 12 deliberately crashed the ascent stage of its lunar module into the surface of our natural satellite. According to NASA, after that, the ringing continued for almost an hour. This made some people argue that the moon must be hollow like a bell. Later, lunar seismology researched those shallow moonquakes and showed that they acted differently than quakes on our planet, mostly due to differences in type, texture, and density of the lunar and Earth's rock layers. The speed of sound waves in solids is determined by the medium's compressibility and density. no one has ever found any evidence of a large empty space inside the moon. And still, in 1970, Michael Vassin and Alexander Sherbakov suggested a hypothesis that the moon could be a spaceship designed by mysterious extraterrestrial beings. In 1965, writer Isaac Asimov made an observation that added fuel to the fire of conspiracy theories. He marveled at the sheer astronomical accident that the moon fits so snugly over the sun during total eclipses. The sun's greater distance makes up for the incomparably larger size of the star. As a result, it seems to us that the moon and the sun are the same size. The author added that there was no astronomical reason why the sun and the moon should fit so well. So since the 1970s, conspiracy theorists have been quoting Asimov's words about solar eclipses as evidence of the artificial origin of the moon. Mainstream astronomers disagree with such an interpretation, saying that the angular diameters of the moon and the sun don't perfectly match during eclipses. They vary by several percent over time. Many other pieces of evidence confirm that the moon is a solid body that formed after a planetoid crashed into Earth. In the past, scientists thought that the moon appeared after our rapidly spinning planet got rid of a good chunk of its mass. This idea was suggested in 1879 by George Darwin, the son of the very Charles Darwin, the famous biologist. This theory remained popular until the Apollo missions. Then, in 1925, Austrian geologist Otto Ampferer offered another idea, that Earth and the moon could have formed together from a primordial accretion disk, a rotating disk of dense gas and dust surrounding a young, newly formed star, and used to be a double system. The third theory stated that the moon could have once been a planetoid caught by the gravity of our planet. The modern explanation usually involves the giant impact hypothesis. According to it, a Mars-sized space body hit Earth and created a debris ring around our planet. In the end, this ring gathered into a single natural satellite, our moon. But getting back to the hollow moon theory, at the moment, there's no scientific evidence to support this hypothesis. Seismic observations and other data indicate that the moon has a solid interior with several layers, a thin crust, quite extensive mantle, and a dense core. These days, the idea of the hollow moon is considered to be a conspiracy theory. Technological progress does not stand still, and over the past decade, the resolution of images of the lunar surface has improved greatly. Many pits have been discovered on the surface, and some of them are really impressive in size. The largest are hundreds of feet deep. However, technology is not yet advanced enough for us to study the bottom of such pits in detail. That's why a recent discovery is surprising. It turns out that huge pits can extend deep into the rock of the moon. It's a groundbreaking discovery. Let's figure out why. So look at this giant underground cave. Leonardo Carrere and Lorenzo Bruzone from the University of Trento were thrilled to finally confirm the existence of such structures on the moon. They analyzed images taken by the mini RF instrument on board the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter in 2010. The original images didn't have excellent resolution, so the authors had to do a huge amount of work, using modern data analysis and modeling techniques. But first things first, why does it all matter so much? Well, instead of building homes on the surface of the moon, we might be able to live inside these natural caves. They could offer protection from dangerous things like harmful space radiation, extreme temperature swings, and even meteorites. According to planetary geologist Wes Patterson from Johns Hopkins, even though we'd still have to bring materials from Earth to make those caves habitable, using them would be a lot easier and cheaper than building bases on the surface. Based on the collected data, the cave is about 150 feet wide and up to 260 feet long, which is just a bit smaller than a football field. It's located in a deep pit called the Mare Tranquillitatis Pit, which likely formed when an ancient lava tube collapsed. Although the moon has no active volcanoes today, billions of years ago, its surface was covered with lava that flowed through valleys, carving out these tubes below the surface. Over time, some of the lava tubes became unstable and collapsed, creating pits like the one in question. NASA's Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, LRO, has already found more than 200 of such pits on the moon. It means there could be hundreds of hidden caves waiting to be explored on our satellite. When publishing their findings in Nature Astronomy, the researchers suggested that the caves could offer future astronauts a safe place to live and work, protecting them from the moon's extreme conditions. And extreme they are. One of the biggest challenges of living on the moon is its temperatures. The lunar surface gets extremely hot during the day, reaching about 250 degrees Fahrenheit, and then the temperature drops below minus 200 degrees Fahrenheit at night. But inside the caves, the temperature could stay much more consistent. A separate study done in 2022 used computer simulations to predict that some of those caves could maintain a comfortable temperature of about 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Much easier to manage, right? Unfortunately, getting to the caves won't be easy. The Mare Tranquillitatis cave is over 400 feet below the surface, at the bottom of a steep slope covered in loose debris. It would take some clever engineering to get up and down that slope. The options could be using jetpacks, a lunar elevator, or some other kind of technology. We must find a way to transport astronauts safely. There's also a lot more to discover. Radar technology could help scientists find even more caves and lava tubes on the moon. In the future, a spacecraft with higher resolution radar could even map the insides of the pits that LRO has already found. According to the researchers, this kind of complete survey could help them figure out the best locations for future lunar bases and other explorations. And there's another potential bonus. Those caves could contain water. Scientists have already found frozen water on the moon, under the surface, and in permanently shadowed craters. Tiny amounts are also scattered across the lunar dirt. Water is a critical resource for any moon base, and finding it in the caves could make the idea of living there even more realistic. All in all, this discovery could be a game changer for lunar exploration. Living in natural caves on the moon might be a more practical and safer option than building something on the surface. It could also bring us one step closer to making the moon a place where humans can live and work for the long term.
Now look at this fancy granite kitchen countertop. This one can also be available on the moon. I mean, there's no production whatsoever as of now, but there's enough raw materials for the kitchen of your dreams. And by the way, granite on the moon can even prove this dark horse had plenty of water at some point. So it all started when scientists found this weird blob of heat on the far side of the moon. It's all because of a massive chunk of granite that's buried underground. Apparently, granite is pretty rare outside of Earth, so this is a big deal. According to the researchers, there's this old volcano on the moon that hasn't erupted in like 3.5 billion years. But it turns out it's still giving off some serious radiation. The scientists used a fancy new method with microwaves to measure the temperature below the moon's surface. They found this area that's about 31 miles across, where it's like 18 degrees warmer than the rest of the place. And it's right under a spot that collapsed and is full of silicon. It's not as thriving as Silicon Valley back on Earth, it's just a volcanic crater, but without all the lava spewing out. The scientists even compared it to those granite rocks you see in Yosemite, like El Capitan and Half Dome. You know, those giant rocks that look super majestic? Well, apparently they're made of the same stuff. Researchers claim that granite is super common on Earth, but not anywhere else in our solar system. So this could change everything we know about other rocky planets. Right, now we know there's granite on the moon, but why is that important to us? So, you know how granite forms on Earth? It's all thanks to water and plate tectonics teaming up to create these huge blobs of melted rock beneath the surface. But guess what? The moon doesn't have any of that action going on, which makes granite super rare up there. But this discovery could give us some clues about what the moon was like back in the day when it had volcanic activity. Without water, making granite becomes a real challenge. But somehow, some way, they found granite on the moon. No water, no plate tectonics, but still, we got granite. So what does that mean? Did the moon have water in this one spot? Or was it just ridiculously hot? I guess we'll need to give a tad more time for the scientists to figure it out. The water on the moon is an issue, though. Duh. As of now, the moon is bigger than the Sahara Desert, but somehow 100 times drier. Astronomers have been debating for ages whether there's any water on this celestial neighbor of ours. But in 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission finally confirmed that there is indeed water on the sunlit part of the lunar surface. Turns out those grains of lunar dust have little molecules of H2O hanging out on them. Back in 1645, when people first started gazing at the moon, they were fascinated by these dark spots all over its surface. Dutch astronomer Michael van Lengren even made a map and called these spots Maria, which means seas in Latin. Sorry, Michael, they're just actually plains of basalt from ancient volcanic eruptions, but we still use the term Maria today. In 1892, an American astronomer named William Pickering discovered that the moon has practically no atmosphere. No clouds, no atmosphere, no chance for water to stick around. So scientists started thinking that the moon was as dry as a desert. But then, in the 1960s, a theoretical physicist named Kenneth Watson came along with an idea. He suggested that water ice could actually exist in the shadowy craters of the moon that never see sunlight. These areas are called permanently shadowed regions. It was a mind-blowing concept at the time. The Apollo missions from 1969 to 1972 finally gave us the chance to look for water on the moon up close and personal. But when the astronauts brought back soil samples, there was no sign of water. So everyone went back to thinking the moon was bone dry. However, in 1994, NASA's Clementine mission suggested that there might be ice in these shadowed craters after all. And in 1998, the Lunar Prospector mission found evidence of hydrogen concentrations in the permanently shadowed areas. This was a strong indication of water ice at the lunar poles. The images weren't super clear, but it was still an exciting discovery. And finally, in 2008, scientists decided to take another look at those Apollo samples. They revisited the old data and found some hints that there might be water after all. It was like finding buried treasure in your own backyard. As you can see, the moon is a pretty promising destination. It even has enough stuff to produce your food supplements – calcium, magnesium, you name it. Just kidding, it's not the best idea to munch on them to boost your diet. But there are a bunch of other applications they can be used for. Calcium is like the fourth most popular element hanging out in the lunar highlands. But here's the cool part. Pure calcium metal is actually super flexible and can conduct electricity like a boss when there's no oxygen around. Who knew, right? Anorthite is a rare gem here on Earth, but up on the moon, it's partly central for calcium. It can even help make those groovy silicon-based solar cells. To make them, you need some lunar silicon, iron, titanium oxide, and of course, our buddy calcium and aluminum. It's like a recipe for solar success up there in space. The moon even has precious metals like gold. In 2009, NASA was on a lunar mission and they found some gold in the lunar soil. They had a spacecraft right behind the rocket, equipped with a fancy spectrometer. Its job was to study all the debris that got released when the rocket crashed. And they found all sorts of chemicals, like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, ammonia, sodium, hydrogen, and even a little bit of mercury, gold, and silver. Hey, vampires beware. Now I know it's been quite a while since then, like 14 years to be exact, but measuring how much gold is actually there has been a real challenge. You see, it's hiding deep beneath the lunar regolith, making it tricky to get an accurate count. Yeah, metals are fun and lunar water may have existed, but what about food? Good news, everyone! Scientists are saying that plants can actually grow on the moon, but don't expect a luscious orchard. It'll be more like a moderate garden with just a couple of beds. Here's the scoop. A while back, those awesome Apollo astronauts collected samples of lunar surface material called regolith and brought them back to Earth. Fast forward 50 years, and NASA decided to use 3 of those samples to try growing plants for the very first time. They used dirt from under the lunar rover bumper to grow these plants. The team added water and seeds to the samples, giving each plant a gram of regolith. Then they placed them in a clean room and added nutrient solutions every day. And they succeeded. During that challenge, the brilliant minds dealt with small plants like mustard greens in the nutrient-poor lunar soil. Yeah, we'll have to export olive oil from Earth to dress it. So, plants can indeed grow in the moon's soil. However, they won't be as strong and healthy as the ones grown on good old Earth soil, or even the ones in the control group grown in a lunar simulant made of volcanic ash. But hey, it's just a start. We're still to find out if our dear moon is hiding more treasures. Have you ever seen the other side of the moon? I caught you. Of course not. But maybe you've seen it in photos. In that case, have you ever wondered why the two sides look so different? Well, let me tell you. We can't see the other side of the moon. People believe this is because the moon doesn't rotate around its axis. But this is not true. The moon does rotate. It just does it at the same rate as its orbital motion. This is a particular case of tidal locking called synchronous rotation. The first time we ever saw a far side was only in 1959, all thanks to the Soviet Luna missions and later the US Apollo program. Now, when Luna 3 and other spacecraft transmitted the first far-side images, they revealed a far more cratered hemisphere that looked more like Mercury or Jupiter's moon Callisto. It looked completely different from what we were used to, and that's when we learned how meh the other side is. No, seriously, just look at it. The near side can boast its thinner and smoother crust. These beautiful dark splotches are called lunar mare, the last remnants of ancient lava flows. And when I say ancient, I mean it. They're more than 3 billion years old. Meanwhile, the far side crust is thicker and crater-pocked. The lava flows had almost no effect on these impact craters. It's also devoid of any large-scale mare. Low-key looks like dried white cheese. To be honest, don't you agree that the nearby side is much more beautiful? Write your thoughts in the comments. So, only 50 years ago, we learned something about the apparent differences. But then the scientists discovered something weird. Both sides are different, even in the geochemical composition. And not only in this, our side was thinner than the far side by several miles. But where did such significant differences come from on an ordinary floating stone ball? For scientists, this was a mystery. They started coming up with a lot of theories. The melted moon theory was the main one for a while. It said that it was the Earth's fault that our moon looks like this. This happened several billion years ago. The moon was born because of a collision. One day, an object about the size of Mars crashed into the Earth. At that moment, a piece broke off from it, which later became the moon. However, this piece was somewhere 15 times closer to Earth than it is now. Some scientists created pictures of the so-called early moon. Unlike our cute little white ball, the early moon was a strange-looking, boiling scarlet ball. That piece didn't leave us after the separation. It became tidally locked very soon after. The Earth after the collision was still an incandescent nightmare, full of fire and lava. It was boiling at a temperature of 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit. And since the moon has always been turned toward us with one side, this side has melted down a little. This would explain why the moon's surface, the so-called mantle, is thinner on the near side than on the far side. During the boiling of the Earth, certain elements evaporated from it. They then settled on the moon. This would explain the difference in geochemical composition between the two sides. But there was a plot hole in this theory. If that's what happened, then where did rare foreign chemical elements come from, such as unusual isotopes of phosphorus, potassium, or tungsten? The nearby site is full of them, and they couldn't have come from the Earth. There were also other theories. Another one said that initially we had two teeny-tiny moons. Later they merged into a big one, hence the difference in their composition. But this theory sounds a bit crazy, and it has a plot hole too. For example, the transition between the two sides is way too soft. If our moon was actually two tiny moons, this transition would be more abrupt. So scientists were kind of at a loss on this one. But recently, they finally figured out what really happened to the moon, all thanks to NASA's Grail orbiters. They spent over a year whizzing around the moon, mapping it out, and studying its composition. Using this data, scientists have created around 360 computer simulations. They contain different impacting objects of many sizes, traveling at different speeds. Scientists were comparing the results with our current moon. They tried to determine which result was the closest to what we have today. And so, they finally solved this 50-year-old mystery. The answer lies in a collision with a dwarf planet. This collision occurred 4.3 billion years ago. This huge object was slightly larger than Ceres. For those who don't know, Ceres is one of the dwarf planets of our solar system. Its diameter is 580 miles. You could say that one France or one Germany would fit into it. So, this giant object crashed into the Moon, somewhere near the South Pole. This collision was so strong that it changed the image of the Moon forever. It left a trail of 3,500 miles behind. It would take you 14 hours by plane to fly that distance. This crater covered the entire near side of the Moon. It caused damage to the Moon's mantle. It also created a so-called South Pole Aitken Base, or SPA basin. This is an impact crater and has a diameter of 1,600 miles, which is like adding one UK plus one Germany. It's important, though. The formation of this basin was a defining event in the history of the Moon, and it's the second largest impact crater in the solar system. The collision also caused a powerful hot wave to spread across the Moon. This wave scattered over the remnants of those rare warm minerals scientists found on the nearby side. That's how our beautiful side became home to something called Procellarum creep terrain, or PKT for short. This is basically a compositional anomaly, a concentration of potassium, phosphorus, and other rare elements like thorium. You can say that those minerals are a gift to us from deep space. Anyway, there were many, and I mean many, collisions in the Moon's history. All of them only deepened this already large crater. That's why the mantle on the near side was getting thinner and thinner with the years. Also, our gifted minerals gave off a lot of heat, so the mantle has melted a little bit more and more. Oops, this accidentally caused the Moon's volcanoes to wake up. Volcanic activity has increased on the near side. Intense lava flows filled the old empty craters. Ta-da! And this is how the beautiful lunar mare was born. That's about how it all happened. All this information was found thanks to the researchers from Brown, Purdue, Stanford Universities, and NASA's JPL. The research was published by the Journal of Geophysical Research, Planets, so you can read about it in more detail if you're interested. There are still many things we need to learn about the Moon. The highest priority is the return mission from the South Pole, the Aitken Basin. Samples brought from there will be used to determine the age of the Moon, its history, and the nature of the crust and mantle more accurately. Another critical target is the Moscovians. This is the name of a large lava plain on the far side of the Moon. Studying it will help us better understand the difference between the two sides, as well as tell us how the other side was formed. All this knowledge is significant for understanding the history of the Moon, but it's also handy for space exploration in general. Scientists use the Moon as a reference point to determine the age of other planets and entire worlds in space. The Moon helps us determine the chronology of the life of the whole solar system. So, stay tuned for new exciting research and discoveries. The first trip intending to land on the Moon made by human mammals took 3 days, 3 hours, and 49 minutes. The Apollo 11 astronauts needed to travel some 240,000 miles to get there. Their plan was to touch down on a place on the Moon called the Sea of Tranquility because it had good visibility and the terrain there was pretty smooth. Well, up until the last few moments of the flight, when all these big craters appeared that they had to avoid, they finally landed with just 30 seconds of fuel left. Ooh, that's called cutting it close. Hey, how would you like to land in your jetliner with only 30 seconds of fuel left? So, now you know. Later that day, July 20th, 1969, Neil Armstrong stepped onto the lunar soil, saying, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The astronauts were planning to sleep before the first moonwalk, but they chose to go outside earlier than scheduled. They obviously couldn't sleep. I mean, could you? Since that first visit, our lunar satellite has accumulated quite a collection of memorabilia from Earth. Let's look at some of the most important and weird stuff that humans have left on the Moon. Take footprints, for starters. I know they're not technically objects, but the marks left by Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin do show that humans have been there, just in case someone or something else drops by. Since the moon doesn't have any wind or rain, the footprints should still be relatively untouched. NASA put in a lot of effort to make sure these footprints stay protected, as well as the location of the initial moon landing. Rules were set into place for future missions to make sure they wouldn't alter the initial site, as it's an important piece of history, kind of like a national park that you can't get to. Now, astronaut Charles Duke wanted to leave a photo of his family on the surface of the moon. If that didn't make him the best dad ever, I don't know what would. He did take his family to the moon, right? On the back of the picture, he wrote that he had come from Earth. He also added the date when he landed on the moon, which was April 20th, 1972. Now, there's a good chance that his family is no longer visible in the picture today. Because of the exposure to strong solar radiation, the colors in the photo have likely faded away by now. To this day, Charles Duke remains the youngest person to visit our moon. He was 36 years old at the time of his mission. Now, there are many flags on the surface of the moon too, but the flags left there must have had a similar fate to Duke's photo. They're most likely discolored by now. During each lunar landing, a flag was planted as a tradition started by Apollo 11. This tradition continued with all future Apollo missions. The flags were made using metal poles to stretch the flag out so they could be seen on the moon. But since there's no wind, they never move. Back in the 1600s, astronomer Galileo Galilei dropped two objects of different weights from the Leaning Tower of Pisa to show that the speed of the fall would be the same. In 1971, astronaut David Scott repeated the experiment on the moon and proved Galileo's theory correct. He dropped a feather and a hammer at the same time, and as predicted, they both landed on the moon's surface simultaneously. Fun fact, the feather came from the Air Force Academy's Falcon mascot named Baffin, with its permission, of course. These objects were both left on the lunar surface. Now, what about art pieces on the moon? We've left some of those out there as well. The Fallen Astronaut sculpture was made by a Belgian artist and left behind by the astronauts of the Apollo 15 mission. It was a small statue requested by David Scott, the head of the mission. Scott said the statue was to memorialize the astronauts and cosmonauts who gave their lives for the advancement of space exploration. Meanwhile, astronaut Alan Shepard even played some golf on the moon during his mission on Apollo 14. He brought a golf club head, yes, he got permission first, and attached it to a tool. Then he tried to hit two golf balls. Hey, it's hard to do in a clunky spacesuit. He did better on the second one. It's safe to say that he didn't bring the golf balls back, and they should still be there on the moon. There's yet a message from Queen Elizabeth II there. The monarch prepared a message which accompanied Neil and Buzz to Tranquility Base during the Apollo 11 mission. It was written on a tiny disc the size of a coin and also featured messages from over 70 other leaders from all over the world. I'll bet the printing was really small. Her message said she was proud of the astronauts and their accomplishments and hoped their journey would benefit all of humanity. The disc was then placed where Armstrong and his team first landed on the moon. After they returned, they met the Queen at Buckingham Palace. Their encounter was memorable too. Neil Armstrong almost couldn't speak to the Queen at all because he had a cold. Another astronaut named Mike Collins was so nervous about the protocol, he almost fell down the stairs. Now, some objects that exist today on the moon weren't left there on purpose. One of the most interesting moments of the Apollo 11 mission was when Neil and Buzz were getting ready to go back to Earth. They had to chuck everything they didn't need so they wouldn't be weighed down at liftoff. They also needed to store all the rock samples they had gathered from the lunar surface. This created a toss zone that archaeologists could potentially study one day. Waste like this acts as a timeline for Earth's history, but it can also help us understand what happens to objects that spend a lot of time on the surface of the moon. Now, most astronauts became pretty sentimental when strolling on the lunar dust, and who could blame them? They were thousands of miles away from their families. So that's why, in 1972, NASA astronaut Eugene Cernan wrote his daughter's initials, TDC, in the dust on the moon, and gave a speech before leaving. He said, "We leave as we came, and hopefully will return with peace and hope for all." Unfortunately, this marked the end of the Apollo lunar missions. Technically, his daughter's initials should still be there on the surface of the moon, just like all the astronauts' footprints. Can you believe it's been more than 50 years since people started exploring the moon? No worries though, as NASA's been preparing for future lunar explorations for quite some time. This new mission is called Artemis, and it aims to build some sort of settlement out there. This way, the moon can be studied in safe conditions for longer periods of time. For starters, NASA launched Orion, a spacecraft without a crew on board, to orbit the moon and come back to Earth. This was a test drive. Before NASA transports people to the moon again using newer technology, all safety measures need to be worked out and confirmed. But one day soon, Orion is going to take astronauts back to the moon. One cool thing about this spacecraft is that it comes with a launch abort system, which is meant to keep astronauts safe in case something goes bad during the launch. It also features a special service module, which is like a battery that fuels and propels Orion through space. It also supplies astronauts with water, oxygen, and power, and provides temperature control. But Artemis also looks to build a long-term human settlement on our satellite somewhere around the 2030s. However, searching for a cozy place on the moon isn't as easy as you'd think. Thankfully, NASA specialists produced an ingenious idea. They found some lava tubes on the surface of the moon, and they have pretty steady temperatures inside. The main problem with the first moon landing back in 1969 was extreme temperature fluctuations. So these caves might be the perfect solution. Not only is the temperature in there suitable for humans, but they could also help shield astronauts from cosmic rays, solar radiation, and meteorites. It's also good news that we have similar structures here on Earth. Before we get back to space, we can study them to better understand those found on the moon. Here on Earth, these holes form once the top of a stream of lava solidifies, and the molten rock inside drains away, creating this tube.
It's been decades since the last manned moon landing, Apollo 17, which happened in December 1972. Isn't it time we thought about going back to our dusty satellite, and maybe even staying there? NASA has made a promise on this subject. They're preparing to send astronauts on the moon again, perhaps by 2025. This will all happen through a program called Artemis. It's also going to include the first woman ever to experience the lunar surface. Now you might ask, why haven't we done this already? One former NASA administrator said something interesting on the subject. It's not because of scientific or technological issues. Problem was that the potential projects took too long and were just too costly. You see, space travel, especially when it involves humans, isn't easy on the pockets. It's true that, in recent years, NASA had budgets of billions of dollars. Sure sounds like enough money, right? Well, not when you check out their to-do list. That's because they have to consider everything. From telescopes and giant rocket projects to missions also targeting the Sun, Jupiter, Mars, and beyond. When you look at it this way, NASA needs to be very good at budgeting to achieve all those goals. It's not just because of finances, though. The moon itself is quite problematic. It poses real dangers that cannot be taken lightly. For starters, its surface is filled with craters and boulders that aren't easy to land on. Then, there is the moon dust, or regolith, if you'd like to call it by its scientific name. It was created over many years by meteorite impacts. It's extremely harsh and sticks to everything. It can potentially damage spacesuits, vehicles, and systems quite quickly. Also, dealing with the lunar habitat isn't a walk in the park either. The moon has no protective atmosphere. What this means is that for 14 days at a time, the lunar surface is faced with harsh rays from the sun. That period is followed by another 2 weeks of total darkness. All these changes create extreme temperatures, which us humans are not really accustomed to. There are solutions, don't worry. NASA is working on dust and sun-resistant spacesuits and vehicles. They're even developing a system that might supply electricity during those lunar nights. What's even more interesting about this system is it could come in handy on Mars too, once we get there. NASA also needs to draw in really smart people for its projects. Think about it. The average age of the people working for the mission control for Apollo 13 was just 26 years old. And these people had already been part of numerous missions by that time, which means they'd had considerable experience from a very young age. But here's where other individuals can help too. In recent years, it wasn't just NASA who's been working tirelessly to revolutionize space travel. There are many successful people out there with enough resources to join in on these efforts. Some are developing new types of rockets that can land on the moon too. In total, NASA landed 12 people on our satellite. It's definitely one of the most awesome moments in its history, if not the best. And those astronauts did amazing things up there. They brought back rocks, took snapshots, did science experiments, and even left flags behind. These were all important moments of the Apollo missions, but they weren't meant to create a safe place for humans on the moon. Scientists have had this idea of a lunar space station for a long time now. It's only logical. After all, it's just a 3-day trip from Earth. It means we can, technically, afford to make little mistakes here and there, without messing up the whole project. Plus, we'd learn so much before venturing even further into space. A moon base could provide fuel for deep space missions. We could also build telescopes up there and launch them way easier in space. It could also help us in another important project: figure out how to make Mars habitable too. Not to mention, a lunar space station would help us learn more about the moon's origin. Who knows, it could even bring in some money because of all that fun, exciting lunar tourism. Either way, the Apollo moon program took a lot of work. For starters, let's look at the sheer number of people involved. Around 400,000 from every corner of the states. Not everything was picture perfect, tough. There were two main unfortunate events. Firstly, a fire mishap at the launch pad of Apollo 1. Secondly, an oxygen tank decided to throw a tantrum on Apollo 13, causing severe issues mid-mission. An important part of the project was Saturn V. It is to this day the most powerful rocket flown successfully, being 36 stories high. Still finding it hard to picture? This rocket stood twice as tall as Niagara Falls. Thanks to Saturn V, NASA successfully completed 13 missions. This included chauffeuring 24 astronauts towards the moon, with half of them even having a little walk on its surface. The existing rockets and space shuttles can't go beyond low Earth orbit. In simpler terms, they can't reach the moon with all the gadgets astronauts need to thrive. Current space vehicles are just not capable of carrying that load, at least not since the Apollo missions happened. Regardless, we did make a lot of progress on Earth and are ready to send astronauts to our satellite pretty soon. Here's where the Artemis project comes in. It's a program overseen by NASA. And to make sure it all goes well, NASA previously launched Orion, a spacecraft with no crew on board to orbit the moon and return to Earth. Think of it as an automated test drive. Before we actually send people out there again, we need to make sure all the devices work properly. One day, Orion will be the vehicle that will take astronauts to the moon again. It features a launch abort system to keep astronauts safe in case something bad happens during launch. It also has a service module, which is the powerhouse that fuels and propels Orion and keeps astronauts alive with water, oxygen, power, and temperature control. All these future projects make one wonder, what will life on the moon be like anyway? We can only use our imagination for now. Some say we'll be living in homes straight out of a fairy tale, something like a cozy hobbit hole. Living underground on the moon might be a must. That's due to the scorching temperatures and the lack of oxygen. If you add meteorite threats and the non-stop radiation, it's no wonder we can't just walk on its surface. What about transportation? Big and small companies alike are trying to create the ideal moon ride. If current estimations are current, one type of moon taxi will take off as soon as 2024. Unlike our current rockets, these space taxis won't have to deal with the harsh conditions of re-entering Earth's atmosphere. It will be easier for them to make multiple round trips. To support our lunar living, we'll need to have a special area for space taxis to safely take off and land. Think of it as a landing pad on a firm, flat stretch of moon surface, protected by walls to shield against moon dust. Moving around on the moon's surface will be made easier too. The next generation vehicles we're talking about will have their own controlled environment, which means you won't need a spacesuit while inside. Should feel like stepping out of your space ride for a bit. Then of course, you'll need to put on your spacesuit. All right. So we've got our homes and our rides sorted. But what about fuel? That's where the moon throws us a lifeline. The moon's lighter gravity means we don't need as much power to escape its pull. Plus, the moon has ice, and that's super handy. We might be able to convert this ice into rocket fuel. We'll need dedicated space gadgets to help gather this ice. One such tool is called Triton. It's like a drill, perfect for digging into the icy moon surface. Additional robotic helpers would then turn this ice into fuel and deliver it to a space gas station. If this works, rockets on their way to Mars could stop by for a quick fuel top-up before continuing their journey.
It all started with a minor change on our planet. At first, people noticed the moon had become brighter and a little bigger, but nobody paid attention to this. The moon affected tides all over the world. The water flooded the beaches, but it wasn't a tragedy. A lot of fish came close to the shores. People found giant squid, anglerfish, and other creatures next to the coast, although they usually live in the dark depths. New, stranger things happen every day. Birds no longer fly to the south in winter. They gather in huge groups, flying around cities with no purpose. The moon used to help them navigate in nature, so they can't figure out which way to fly anymore. In the boundless waters of the world's oceans, ship captains notice that compasses are now unstable. The arrow is pointing in different directions since the Earth's magnetic poles have changed. People realize the moon has started to approach Earth for an unknown reason. The moon's gravity affects the gravity of our planet. This entails changes in the climate, the behavior of all living beings, and the magnetic field. Now, it rains in the driest places and gets hot in the coldest lands. It's knocking down ecosystems all over the planet. People living near forests hear wolves howling all the time. The moon drives these animals mad. The Earth's natural satellite is growing in size and lights up the night much brighter. Nothing critical has happened yet. People don't panic because they don't want to believe the end is coming. But then, one day, the moon reaches a critical point. You're walking down the street listening to music, and at that moment, someone pushes you. Okay, maybe that guy is late for work. You keep walking, and a girl coming by hits your shoulder. "I'm sorry," she says, and goes away. You've noticed the fear in her eyes. You look ahead and see people running towards you. You take off your headphones and hear screams and sirens. People leave their cars and run away. Hundreds of seagulls are flying in the sky. You hear a strange noise among all the sounds of chaos. It seems to be water. How is this possible? You're in the city center, a few miles from the shore. But there's no time to think. You notice a huge wave flooding the streets and heading straight to you. You run into a building and go up to the 10th floor. From here, you're watching the water filling the city. The strong stream blows all cars, one-story buildings, and trees off the road. You notice a shark and other fish in the water. People are hiding in houses and on the roofs. The whole city is quickly plunging into a catastrophe. The TV is working in the building where you're hiding. You learn that floods are occurring all over the world. Massive tsunamis cover coastal cities. In some places, waves reach the height of a 30-story building. Many towns have been washed off the face of the Earth. The moon is too close to Earth, and massive floods are just the beginning. The moon flies around Earth and helps to keep our home on its axis. The moon provides climate stability and helps living organisms develop. But now, this balance is broken. The moon is approaching and changing our planet's gravity. Earth can tilt slightly to the side and provoke massive floods around the world. Imagine that you're holding a round glass of water. Tilt it a little. See how the liquid moves from one side to another? The same thing is happening now with the oceans. But the moon is not just approaching us. It's flying around the planet and getting closer with each circle. It causes natural disasters in different locations on Earth all the time. Now the ocean floods one side, and a few hours later, another. So you see all the water going back from the streets to the shore. The oceans may return to the city again by the end of the day. Wait a minute. It seems the end of the day has already come. You notice that the sky has become dark. It's weird, because it's only 3 p.m. The moon changes Earth's rotation speed and makes the day go faster. The moon covers almost the entire sky and brightly illuminates our planet. You see huge lunar craters. It's so close that you can still see it even when the sun shines. In some places, the passing moon obscures the sun. The water is leaving the streets and everyone goes outside. At this moment, an earthquake begins. The road is cracking and the houses are collapsing. There are landslides on the street. Tectonic plates are shifting all over the planet. Imagine two magnetic balls that are approaching each other. So, one ball is the moon, and the second one is Earth's core. What do you think will happen to what's above the core? That's hundreds of thousands of miles of the Earth's crust. And now, it's all moving. Destructive cracks are emerging all over the world. The planet's highest mountains break down and turn into a pile of stones. The seabed cracks and releases magma from the underground depths. Volcanoes wake up and erupt magma. Clouds of volcanic ash cover the sky from the sun and the glowing moon. But the scariest thing is still ahead. A collision is inevitable. The moon flies around the planet like a ball in a round glass with a hole in the center. This force drives clouds all over the planet. Now there's a thunderstorm, but in 5 minutes, it will be snowing. Then the night comes, and it starts raining. Water droplets consist of mud and volcanic ash. It's difficult for people to breathe without gas masks. Atmospheric pressure is constantly changing. Some people experience severe migraines, and some have sore joints. But there's no time to think about your health. Humanity needs to figure out how to save itself from the collision. A new gravitational order will come when the moon crashes into Earth. Continents will change their shape. They will combine into one giant piece of land or split into 100 smaller ones. The energy of the collision can burn all the oxygen in the atmosphere and make the planet unsuitable for life. Hiding underground also makes no sense because of deep earthquakes. People decide to spend their last hours with loved ones and their families. The moon is getting closer. It's now at the same distance as the International Space Station. The moon covers the sky. Many cities are in the shadows because of the waves. Tsunamis, several miles in height, crash down on the ground. Millions of tons of magma collide with the ocean. Billions of gallons of water just evaporate. Moisture rises into the air, mixes with ash, and floods the land in the form of giant cumulus clouds. You've accepted the complete destruction of the planet. But something strange happens to the moon at this moment. You notice giant cracks appear on it. The moon slowly begins to divide into two parts. Both halves crumble into hundreds of large pieces. It's just falling apart. The Earth doesn't have a natural satellite anymore. It's just a pile of giant space rocks. But why is this happening? There's a space around our planet called the Roche limit. In this place, the gravity of Earth is stronger than that of the moon. This means that the forces holding the moon together are weaker than those that tear it apart. People are cheering. The Roche limit has saved the planet. The moon won't hit us. It breaks up into millions of fragments and forms a circle around our globe. Now, Earth looks like Saturn. A belt of moonstones surrounds us. Huge chunks destroy everything in their path, all the space debris. The satellites are no longer working. Humanity loses its means of communication and navigation. People will have to use paper maps again. The moon held our planet's orbit at a certain angle before these events. Now the axis is tilted differently. One hemisphere becomes closer to the sun, and the other plunges into shadow. The North Pole and the Arctic may turn into hot deserts, and the equator of the planet may be covered with ice. Winter and summer can last for years. The moon's remnants fly around Earth, but some of them fall on our planet. Lunar meteor showers destroy cities and create giant craters. All these events lead to the massive destruction of life on Earth. It will take hundreds of thousands of years to adapt to the new world.
NASA has some incredible plans for the moon. For example, their next ambitious lunar program, Artemis II. They've set their sights on landing astronauts, including the first woman and the next man, on the moon by 2024. Artemis is all about building a sustainable presence on the moon. They're planning to establish a lunar gateway, a sort of space station in lunar orbit, which will serve as a jumping-off point for lunar landings. And let's not forget about the cool lunar landers. Scientists are developing the mighty Space Launch System rocket, which will launch the Orion spacecraft carrying astronauts towards the moon. Then there's the Human Landing System, a snazzy lunar lander that will gently touch down on the moon's surface, allowing astronauts to explore and conduct amazing scientific experiments. And NASA isn't going alone this time. They're teaming up with international partners, like the European Space Agency, to make this lunar dream a reality. But all these wonderful dreams might be ruined by something that seems super small and insignificant at first. Picture this: no atmosphere, no air to breathe, and suddenly, a mysterious haze and radiant beams of light appear at sunrise and sunset. It's as if the moon is putting on a celestial show. But there is a twist to this beauty. During the Apollo 17 mission in 1972, this beautiful sight made one of the NASA astronauts, Harrison Schmitt, sneeze and made his eyes water. He called it lunar hay fever. This mysterious fever affected all 12 moonwalkers. From sneezing fits to stuffy noses, those astronauts experienced symptoms as if they caught a cold. It took days for the reactions to fade away. This event led to a discovery about lunar dust and its darker side. When scientists found out about these rays, they rolled up their sleeves and delved into their origins. And here's what they discovered. Those radiant bands of light were actually caused by sunlight sneaking through layers of teeny-tiny lunar dust. The dust was composed of small particles and sharp glass shards and was lurking everywhere. And it turned out that this lunar dust was a sneaky villain. It brought a whole host of problems. Astronauts who found themselves with impaired vision were just the beginning. The troublemaker went even further, damaging precious machinery and causing electronic malfunctions. It even had the audacity to corrode components and smelled like burnt gunpowder inside the spacecraft. Yikes. It clings to everything, coating surfaces like a mischievous blanket. It can clog up equipment, get into delicate machinery, and even mess with astronauts' spacesuits. In 1972, things got really hairy again. The Apollo 17 astronauts faced a nightmare. After just 22 hours of gallivanting on the lunar surface, their spacesuits suffered irreparable damage. Yes, you heard that right. Irreparable. The dust diminished astronauts' mobility, making it harder for them to move around and perform their moonwalks with grace. And no matter how hard they tried to clean it off, it clung on for dear life, leaving the spacesuits in a sorry state. So, as you can see, it poses some serious challenges for future moon missions. But our intrepid scientists aren't giving up. To solve this problem, they have to understand how lunar dust forms and why it's so darn clingy. They found out that it all begins with meteorite impacts. When these space rocks crash into the moon, they generate a fine dust that fills the air. Sometimes these impacts even cause minerals to melt, forming sharp glass shards that mix with the dust. Talk about a moon makeover. The dust is also filled with silicate, a material commonly found on volcanic planets. Silicate inhalation can cause serious lung problems for Earth's miners, so you can imagine the trouble it can cause on the moon. A recent study found that even a scoop of replica moon dust was toxic enough to destroy up to 90% of lung and brain cells exposed to it. But it gets worse. The low gravity on the moon allows those tiny particles to float around for much longer, penetrating deeper into the lungs. Imagine breathing particles 50 times smaller than a human hair for months. That's a recipe for trouble. And you see, on the moon's surface, things are a bit different than here. There are no rainstorms or strong gusts of wind to blow this dust away. There is also no atmosphere to protect the surface. So without the natural forces of wind and water erosion like we have on Earth, these dry particles stick around persistently. And to make matters more electrifying, the moon is constantly showered by radiation from the sun. This exposure gives the dust an electric charge. The solar winds create positively and negatively charged particles. The particles then buzz around, repelling each other and giving rise to those radiant bands of light that the Apollo 8 astronauts witnessed. It's like a disco party on the moon. ESA, the European Space Agency, has gathered a team of experts to study the lunar dust. They're working with simulated moon dust mined from a volcanic region in Germany to understand its behavior and effects. Engineers also need to find a way to protect future astronauts and equipment. Engineers in NASA want to create spacesuits that can survive not 1, not 10, but a whopping 100 extravehicular activities on the lunar surface. That's like spending 800 hours out there, exploring and having a blast. Besides that, NASA initiated the Breakthrough, Innovative, and Game-Changing Idea Challenge in 2021. It was open to clever university students from all over the world. These young minds put their thinking caps on and unleashed a wave of innovative solutions. For example, they proposed using special fibers that conduct electricity, inspired by fluffy chinchilla hair. Just like how chinchillas stay dust-free, these fibers would help keep the lunar dust at bay. A furry friend lending a helping paw, isn't that adorable? Another bright idea involved an electrically charged brush activated by UV radiation. It's like a magical wand that zaps away the dust with a flick. Abracadabra, lunar dust be gone. And let's not forget the fabric inspired by clever insects. These insects have pollen-collecting structures that repel unwanted dust. So our ingenious students thought, why not mimic that? They designed a fabric with similar properties, creating a shield against the sneaky lunar particles. What's remarkable about these ideas is that they all use the power of charge to fight the dust. They cleverly repel it from the spacesuits, keeping them clean and protected. And even though all these ideas sound pretty great, scientists in NASA unleashed another, even better solution: carbon nanotubes. It's a great way to revolutionize spacesuit fabric. What makes these carbon nanotubes so special? Well, they possess some amazing superpowers. First off, they're superconductive, meaning they can carry electricity like nobody's business. It's like having a lightning bolt trapped inside a microscopic tube. Not only that, but these carbon nanotubes are tougher than the toughest meteors. They have the strength to withstand the harsh lunar environment, where even a speck of dust can cause trouble. Imagine having a suit made of a material that's stronger than Superman's cape. So, NASA's scientists decided to weave these extraordinary carbon nanotubes into the spacesuit fabric. The electrodes were carefully integrated into the outer layer of the fabric, making it a force to be reckoned with. But how do they banish the lunar dust? Well, here comes electrifying science again. When activated by a special alternating current, the electrodes create powerful electric fields. These fields work like magnets, repelling both charged and uncharged dust particles away from the spacesuit. Picture this like a dance party, where the dust particles are the uninvited guests, and the electric fields are the bouncers, swiftly escorting them out. Thanks to this technology, lunar dust doesn't stand a chance against our astronauts. Also on the bright side, the lunar soil can be used to make bricks for shelters. It can also help extract oxygen for astronauts to survive on the moon for long periods of time. When life gives you lemons, make a lemonade, right? So, let's cheer on our NASA Dream Team as they embark on this epic lunar quest. Let's hope that they succeed in their findings, and the next moon mission won't be a big problem. Stay tuned.
Soon we might start constructing loads of stuff on the moon. All because India's moon mission has recently detected sulfur near the moon's south pole. this chemical element can come in extremely handy for creating infrastructure on our satellite. It's the first time this chemical element has been discovered on Earth's natural satellite. This sought-after element is mostly found near Earth's volcanoes. Its appearance on the Moon speaks volumes about the satellite's volcanic history and its past atmospheric conditions. The mission's rover detected this chemical element less than a week after touching down around 70 degrees from the Moon's south pole on the 23rd of August, 2023. This historic landing on the lunar surface made India the fourth country to safely land a mission on the Moon. It's also the first spacecraft to touch down so close to the south pole of our satellite. It's an area of strategic importance because it's believed to be home to deposits of water ice. If it turns out to be true, future missions might be able to harvest it and turn this water ice into drinking water or even rocket fuel. For 2 weeks, the lander carried out the data collection, mainly focused on the analysis of the Moon's soil and its extremely thin atmosphere. Meanwhile, the solar-powered Pragyan rover started its quest to find frozen water on the Moon. As for the lander, it demonstrated another amazing feat on the 3rd of September. The spacecraft fired up its engines and lifted itself for about 16 inches into the air. Then it made a tiny hop to land 12 to 16 inches away from its original position. It's kinda a big deal. Being able to get a lander back off the surface of the Moon is essentially for future missions, showing that they can safely return soil samples or even astronauts back home after a lunar mission. In September, the Indian spacecraft was put into sleeping mode. The 14-day-long lunar night was approaching, and the spacecraft wasn't designed to collect scientific data during this period of time. So far, we've learned about a few major findings of the mission. One is related to measuring the temperature of the Moon's topsoil at different depths. Intriguingly, the surface of the satellite in that region turned out to be hotter than expected. It was believed that the temperature could be between 68 and 86 degrees Fahrenheit on the surface, but it was around 158 degrees Fahrenheit, way hotter than it should be. The other discovery indicates the presence of several chemical elements, including oxygen. Besides, the data received from the spacecraft confirms the presence of aluminum, calcium, iron, titanium, silicon, and other chemical elements on the lunar surface close to the South Pole. The rover also used special instruments designed to measure quakes and rumbles beneath the lunar surface to detect some seismic activity. It brings us back to the sulfur detected thanks to the rover's spectroscope. Scientists are currently working on figuring out whether this element formed on the surface in a natural way or whether it's the result of volcanic activity or a meteor strike. Another astonishing thing found on the Moon is a rock, and it may be the oldest known Earth rock. A 0.7-inch wide chip included in a large rock collection brought to our planet by Apollo astronauts might actually be a 4 billion-year-old fragment of Earth. This finding could help us paint a better picture of the intense pounding early Earth got at the dawn of its life. It could go like this. Soon after the rock formed, an asteroid impact might have blasted it from Earth. At that time, our planet's satellite was 3 times closer to Earth than it is today. The collision was so powerful that this chunk of terrestrial rock found its way to the Moon. Later, this fragment got engulfed in a lunar breccia, a motley kind of rock. Eventually, the rock was brought back home to Earth by Apollo 14 astronauts. Even though scientists had found meteorites coming from Mars and the Moon before, it was the first time a rock from the Moon turned out to be a terrestrial meteorite. They also found out that the rock had formed in a water-rich environment at temperatures and pressures corresponding to those at around 12 miles beneath the surface of our planet. In 2019, China's Chang'e 4 mission made history by landing on the far side of the Moon. The mission's rover helped researchers visualize structures hidden deep below the surface of the satellite, revealing billions of years of lunar history. The Yutu-2 rover made this discovery with the help of its lunar penetrating radar. It imaged deep into the moon's surface and listened to echoes of sound bouncing back off structures hidden from view under the surface of the moon. It turned out those structures were resting at depths of almost 1,000 feet. The research suggests that the first 130 feet under the surface are made up of layers of dust, soil, and rocks. The instruments also discovered a concealed crater that must have formed after a large object slammed into the moon's surface. Long, long ago, ancient lava was likely to be flowing deep underground. Researchers believe that the broken rocks around the formation might be debris produced by the impact. They also found that the volcanic rock layers were thinner the closer they were to the surface. Such a thickness variation of lava flows might mean a decrease in the number and magnitude of eruptions over time. So, lunar volcanic activity gradually dwindled since the moon's formation around 4.5 billion years ago. On the far side of the moon, there is one of the largest and oldest impact craters in our solar system, the South Pole Aitken Basin. Unfortunately, from Earth, you can only see its outer rim, which looks like a huge chain of mountains. It's a ginormous 8-mile deep dent, stretching for more than 1,500 miles in diameter and covering 1/4 of the moon's surface. Astronomers are sure that this crater appeared when an asteroid collided with the moon around 4 billion years ago. And now, look at this gigantic chunk of metal the size of 4 states of Connecticut. As for its weight in pounds, it's enough to say that the number contains 18 zeros. This mysterious mass is hidden about 180 miles under the moon's surface, somewhere in the middle of the South Pole Aitken Basin. It was discovered when GRAIL, which stands for NASA's Gravity Recovery and Interior Laboratory mission, gathered data about our natural satellite. When examining this information, scientists noticed that in one place on the moon's surface, there was a weird change in gravity. After researching this phenomenon, they concluded that something mysterious was weighing down the basin floor there. So far, researchers haven't figured out the origin of the bizarre lump, but there are several theories. One of them claims that the finding is a chunk of dense oxide, which appeared when the moon was just taking its shape. At that time, the satellite was still covered with ancient oceans of magma, and the lump could be formed at the final stages of its cooling. However, most scientists support another theory, according to which the puzzling mass is part of the giant asteroid that once created the South Pole Aitken Basin. Since the thing is metallic, it's probably the iron-nickel core of the asteroid. There might be a labyrinth of lava tubes on the moon. Not so long ago, astronomers received the results of underground topography and discovered a massive cave under the surface of Earth's satellite. It could be the result of the lunar volcanic activity that happened more than 3 billion years ago. Streams of lava hardened, creating a thick, hard crust on the outside. But inside, it kept flowing, melting the rock and creating tunnels and caves. Numerous small pits in the moon's surface discovered by NASA seem to be the openings to such lava tubes. If this theory is confirmed, the underground tunnels might serve not only as a convenient location for human-crewed space missions, but also as much-needed water sources for astronauts.
Our moon exploration project started out in 1969. Sure, there have been some problems along the way, but astronomers are certain we'll get back up there pretty soon and with better knowledge and technology. However, there's an 800-year-old trick that might become way more useful than fancy GPS tech and powerful rockets. It's called the Fibonacci sphere. Some scientists at a Hungarian university stumbled upon this idea while studying the moon. They believe it might be useful to better understand how the moon spins and how it's a bit squished while it goes around Earth. You might believe that our planet and its satellite are these perfect little spheres floating in space. Well, that's not true. They are in fact like slightly deflated soccer balls because of all the gravity, rotating movements, and tides. The GPS technology we use here on Earth is already adapted to these less than perfect ball proportions. Remember, our planet is a bit flattened at its poles. If we're going to make a map system for the Moon, we need to do the same for its shape, called a solenoid, or what scientists call the Moon's version of our Earth's shape. Since the Moon is less compressed than our planet, scientists have been taking a shortcut until now. They've been looking at our satellite as a simple ball shape. However, with all these new projects coming up in the following decades and even some exciting trips we might end up having on the Moon, we need to be more precise. Scientists now believe we should get the real data and start drawing an accurate picture of the Moon. Here's where the Fibonacci sphere comes in handy. It's a clever solution that's been used by mathematicians to spread points out evenly on a ball. Scientists recently used it to map around 100,000 spots on the Moon using data previously collected by NASA. And what they found was crucial for our understanding of the Moon's shape. For instance, we now know that our satellite's poles are about 0.3 miles closer to the center compared to the Moon's equator. Sure, it might seem like a tiny detail, but if we adjust our GPS software accordingly before we land on the Moon again, it might save us from getting lost up there. This level of math hasn't been done since the 60s for the Moon, but we already know it works wonders here at home, so it only makes scientists better prepared for future missions. This isn't the first time people have used Fibonacci's findings to come up with clever solutions. We've also seen it put to work in finance, agriculture, and in computer science. Let's see where it all came from. Legend has it that the Italian mathematician Fibonacci wasn't really that interested in mathematical sequences at first, but rather in rabbits? So, he came up with this interesting puzzle. What happens if you place a pair of rabbits in a certain space for a year? He also set some theoretical rules. For starters, all those bunnies come in boy-girl pairs, and they can start reproducing after just a month. Each month, each bunny pair adds one more pair of bunny offspring. The last rule was that all bunnies would be invincible for the year. Doing the math, he got this series of numbers. 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so on. If you look at this series again, you'll notice that every number is the sum of the two before it. The first two, that's your starting bunny pair. Next, you'll see the number 2, which is the first pair and their first offspring pair. Word caught on about this interesting sequence, and math lovers began studying it more closely. They started seeing this pattern very often in nature, like in how leaves grow on a plant or how seeds arrange on sunflowers. There's even a little experiment you can do to check it out. Start by grabbing some paper and a pen. Try drawing the Fibonacci spiral. Start with a tiny circle, then go bigger and bigger using those Fibonacci numbers. The first circle should just be a tiny dot on the paper, or the equivalent of 0. Next circle, 1 unit. Another circle, still 1 unit. Keep it going and you'll see that the circles form this spiral pattern. Even as it continues to grow, it keeps its shape. You might have also stumbled upon the Fibonacci spiral as a symbol of hypnosis. In all fairness, there's little evidence you can confuse someone by making them stare into a spiral for a while. But its effects on our focus and our optic nerves can't be ignored. After you've stared at a spinning spiral, you might see how objects get smaller or bigger depending on the direction of the swirl. It's easy to understand why some experience this sensation as hypnotizing. This interesting series of numbers appears in our day-to-day lives, even if we don't notice it. It can also be used in more practical instances, like converting miles to kilometers. Let's look at the series 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13. Pick any two numbers side by side. Say 13 and 21. Do the calculations and you'll notice that 13 miles is about 21 kilometers. Same with 34 and 55. Music and math might not seem like they're connected. But if you had asked the great Mozart, he probably wouldn't have agreed. It seems he was very passionate about numbers from early on in his career. He loved finding cool number patterns in music, like some sort of hidden messages. His own sister even remembered him doodling math all the time, even on the sides of his music sheets. Some scholars believe he might have even played around with the Fibonacci numbers. If that's really the case, then he might have used the ration to balance out parts of his tunes. What about other types of art? Well, it's also said that Leonardo da Vinci used the golden ratio in his masterpieces, like the Vitruvian Man and the Mona Lisa. Also, when it comes to great pieces of architecture, the Parthenon might have used this pattern too. Anytime you see buildings with columns spaced just right, you can be certain that's where the builders drew inspiration from. The Great Pyramid of Giza is another great example. There's no official record to prove it, but the pyramid's shape is so close to the golden ratio that it's kind of obvious. You'll also see this pattern appearing naturally in our environment. Go out in our garden and check to see if you have any pine cones lying around. See those scales? They're set up in a pattern according to the Fibonacci sphere. Even the bones in our body seem to be growing based on the same proportions. We've got one torso, one head, and one heart. Then there's stuff that comes in pairs. Our arms, legs, eyes, and ears, for instance. For the number 3, think about the composition of our limbs and the 3 main sections in our hand. The wrist part, the middle palm part, and our fingers, which are also split into 3, by the way. Oh, speaking of fingers, their bone lengths have this ratio too. This design helps our fingers move smoothly, especially when grabbing objects. The Fibonacci sequence can be seen in the way ocean waves curve, and how rivers split and flow too. Weather patterns can also follow this rule. Some whirlpools and hurricanes form and spread out in the same way the Fibonacci spiral does. Zoom out, and you'll see that spirals aren't just found here on Earth. They're also everywhere in space, and it isn't random. Most galaxies, including our Milky Way, are spirals. Think of it like this. Generally, stars in a young galaxy don't all appear at once. Some are faster when developing, others take their time. This makes gravity pull in different ways, making the young galaxy spin like a disk. As it spins, different levels of gravity stretch it into getting these spiral arms. On the flip side, if all the stars in a young galaxy appear at the same time, gravity just smushes it all into an egg shape, or what the astronomers call elliptical.
About a century ago, people envisioned the 21st century as a time filled with quirky inventions. They weren't far off the mark. We're now one step closer to establishing an actual settlement on the moon. Before we can create a new home up, we need to find a way to stay connected, beyond just transportation and shipping. Being able to send a simple text, even something as casual as, "Hey, how are you?" is essential. We can't move to the moon if we're cut off from Earth. Let me spill some tea. A lunar 4G network is currently being developed. The company leading this initiative is none other than Nokia's Bell Labs. The company, bought by the world-famous Finnish company that started out as a paper mill in the 19th century and later ventured into the cell phone industry, creating iconic devices long before Apple launched its first phone. Once the network is completed, it will be loaded onto a lander, deployed, and connected using specialized radio equipment. But don't think this is just a fun experiment. It has significant purposes. The Lunar Outpost rover, one of the vehicles involved in this mission, will thoroughly explore an area known as the Shackleton Connecting Ridge. Another rover, the Micronova, will investigate a lunar crater in search of ice. When they discover ice and capture images, this information will be first transmitted to the lander and then relayed to Earth, an unprecedented achievement in history. Moreover, the importance of a reliable phone connection cannot be overstated. Currently, astronauts communicate via radio. But NASA aims to establish a lunar communication system capable of supporting high-resolution video. Effective communication during space missions is as crucial as food and water, and with this new lunar 4G technology, video calls on the moon could soon become a reality. Plus, thanks to lunar 4G, we'll be able to track how the endangered species sent to the moon are doing. Oh, sorry, I completely forgot to mention something important. As more species edge closer to extinction today, scientists are collecting samples from animals, plants, and other organisms to store in biorepositories around the globe. Unfortunately, the conditions on Earth are far from ideal for these modern-day Noah's Arks. Hence, the decision to build 1 or 2 vaults on the Moon makes perfect sense. On the Moon, there's a permanently shadowed region at its south pole. It may seem like a fortunate coincidence, but some lunar craters may meet the criterion of temperature, -320 degrees Fahrenheit, which is precisely what we need for long-term self-storage. Initially, the plan was to construct the vault in lava tubes that run beneath the Moon's surface, but that would have posed significant risks. This design requires a special solar-powered cooling system, and any accidental loss of power could be catastrophic, resulting in the destruction of all the samples. However, if we built it in a forever frozen shadowed area, the vault wouldn't need any energy or human maintenance. Bingo! It sounds almost too good to be true, and indeed there are several complications. For instance, dust is an omnipresent issue on the Moon, infiltrating everything. If the storage requires seals, a dust mitigation system must be developed, which has not yet been created. So for now, it remains a theoretical concept rather than a practical solution.
40, 50 feet, why don't you turn around and let them get a view from there and...
I know you want to learn about real things, not just concepts. Here's something real for you. The Moon is full of human waste, carefully packed into bags. According to estimates, there are around 96 of these bags you'd probably prefer to never open. But you never know what exactly is hidden inside. It could be any product of the human body out there. So, if we ever make it to the Moon and you accidentally stumble upon a mysterious bag, my advice is to resist the urge to open it. Instead, you can hand it over to scientists. They say they're eager to get their hands on them. Humans are incredible, in a rather unfortunate way. We haven't even established a proper settlement on the Moon yet, but there's already around 200 tons of junk scattered about. It piles up there as if it were a teenager's room rather than a celestial body. Alongside those rather unappealing human waste bags, you'll also find cameras, drills, towels, brushes, rakes, a multitude of other technical items, and surprisingly, a falcon's feather. I'll explain that in a moment. At the end of Apollo 15's final moonwalk, David Scott pulled out a falcon's feather and a hammer to demonstrate Galileo's theory that in the absence of air resistance, different objects fall at the same rate. Amidst all that junk, there's an actual piece of art, so we could say that the Moon, if it doesn't have the very first art museum, at least boasts a small exhibition. The crew of Apollo 15 took a 3.5-inch tall aluminum figure to the Moon. Created by a Belgian artist, it's called the Fallen Astronaut, and it was laid on its side with a plaque listing the names of astronauts and cosmonauts who contributed to exploration. But the list of odd objects on the Moon doesn't end there. If you ever find yourself in need of cash, you can find it on the Moon, since a stack of $2 bills was simply forgotten there. Yep, a lot of material has been collected since 1969, when humans first stepped on the Moon.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Our natural satellite was first seen in a telescope in 1609. But what about its true age? To understand that, we need to start with how the Moon first formed. Back in the mid-80s, a conference in Hawaii brought together a bunch of scientists to figure out where the Moon came from. They came up with a pretty cool idea. The Moon probably formed with the stuff that our planet Earth donated. Picture this. A Mars-sized object crashed into the early Earth, flinging molten materials into space, which eventually came together to become the Moon we see today. This theory clears up a lot of mysteries. For instance, it used to baffle folks why the Moon has such a small iron core. The answer is simple. It formed from Earth's outer layer, which isn't rich in iron. And that pale crust of the Moon? It's just minerals that floated to the top when the molten Moon cooled down. At first, the moon was super close to Earth, but it's been slowly drifting away at about 2 inches a year, even while you're watching this video. Figuring out when this all went down, though, is a bit tricky. The Apollo astronauts brought back a bunch of moon rocks, which helped scientists estimate their ages. The oldest ones are around 4.35 billion years old, which is about 200 million years after the solar system kicked off. So, here's the thing. There's no exact date for when the moon formed, but there are several interesting theories. One idea is that the age of these rocks could mean the moon is around 4.35 billion years old. But some scientists who look at how planets form think that most of the material in the early solar system came together way before that 200 million year mark. They argue that a big impact that created the moon happening that late seems pretty unlikely, which means the moon could actually be older than 3.5 billion years. Another interesting thought is that the moon might have gone through some serious heating events as it moved away from Earth. This is similar to what happens on Io, one of Jupiter's supervolcanic moons. The gravitational pull from a bigger body can stretch and compress a smaller one, generating heat, like when you squeeze a rubber ball. The rocks on both Io and the moon warm up this way. Rocks have radioactive elements that act like internal clocks, helping scientists figure out their ages. The catch is, if the moon heats up too much, it resets those clocks and only starts keeping time again once it cools down. So those rocks that are about 4.35 billion years old might not actually mark the moon's birthday. They could just indicate a time of tidal heating. This suggests, once again, that the moon had to have formed even earlier than that.
Okay, I officially give up on the hope that the moon is made of cheese after all. Wow, not even Gouda. The shiny lunar ball, or a curved banana, or half of a coin, depending on what phase it's in, has different layers inside, just like Earth. One of these layers is called the inner core. About 20 years ago, scientists were observing how the moon rotates. Using that data, they concluded that it had a fluid outer core. But the inner core was hard to study, so they didn't know if it was solid like a rock or molten like a hot liquid. But things are clearer now. Astronomers have collected data from different missions, including the Apollo missions, where astronauts went to the moon and gathered information themselves. Plus, they've used a special technique called seismic data. This method is all about studying how sound waves move through things. Take earthquakes on our planet as an example. When an earthquake happens, it creates waves that travel through the ground. Scientists can detect and analyze these waves to learn more about Earth's interior. The same idea can apply to other objects in our solar system, or planets, or, in this case, the moon. When quakes or moonquakes happen, they generate sound waves, and by carefully listening to and studying these waves, scientists can create a detailed map of what's inside the object. They can figure out things like different layers, what they're made of, and how they're arranged. To check the moon's deep interior, scientists also use something called laser ranging. This method measures the distance between the surface of the Earth and the moon very precisely. And ta-da! Our natural satellite's inner core is a dense, solid ball made of iron, just like Earth's. It's about 310 miles wide, which is nearly 15% the size of the entire moon. Researchers also have stumbled upon evidence that supports the theory that the layer between the moon's surface and its core, called the mantle, has been moving around as the moon evolved over time. This movement is something we call lunar mantle overturn, and it could explain why we find elements rich in iron on the lunar surface. Mantle material ends up being carried upward, and the volcanic rock remains in the moon's crust. Some of the materials in this rock were too dense, like me, so they just sank back through the lighter crust material all the way to the core mantle boundary. It's like a cycle where the moon's mantle material goes up during volcanic activity, carries iron-rich elements to the surface, and then sinks back down. There's another mystery scientists have been trying to solve. What caused the moon's magnetic field to weaken and nearly disappear over time? It seems that now that we know about the iron core and the global mantle overturn, we might get some more answers about the moon's magnetic field. Knowing what the inner core is like can help us better understand the Moon's history as well as the history of our entire solar system. Now, one of the theories that's widely accepted about the origin of the Moon says there was a massive collision between Earth, in its early stages, and another mysterious object in our solar system. It's called the Large Impact Theory, and this collision was so strong it ripped off a big chunk of the primitive molten Earth. I mean, not so big compared to what's left. If you put a US nickel next to a green pea, you get a good idea of how big our planet is compared to the Moon. Now, this chunk was set into orbit around our planet, and this might have happened about 95 million years after our solar system formed. The object that collided with Earth could have been about 10% the mass of our home planet and roughly the size of Mars. Well, it makes sense. Earth and the Moon do have similar compositions after all. Of course, there are other ideas about how the Moon formed. One says that the gravitational force of our planet captured it. This means that the Moon was just an object innocently passing by when suddenly it got attracted and pulled into Earth's orbit. There's even a hypothesis that Earth stole the Moon from Venus. Ooh. In that case, the Moon shouldn't complain. I guess the view is way better here. So yeah, the Moon and Earth are similar when it comes to rocks and some minerals. But the Moon doesn't have the same atmosphere as our planet. Its atmosphere is thin and consists of some weird gases that include potassium and sodium, which is not something you can find in the atmosphere of Mars, Venus, or Earth. And the rocks on the Moon don't contain water, but that doesn't mean there's no water at all up there. A long time ago, in the 17th century, astronomers saw large dark spots on the Moon's surface. One of these astronomers thought these spots looked like oceans, and he called them maria, which means seas in Latin. Other astronomers also made maps of the Moon, and they used the term maria to describe these dark spots. For example, Mare Tranquillitatis translates to Sea of Tranquility, where Apollo 11 made its touchdown. But it seems those dark spots are not actually oceans. They are plains made of hardened lava that erupted long ago. These volcanic eruptions left behind smooth flat areas called basalt plains. In the late 1800s, one skywatcher studied the Moon and found it didn't have an atmosphere. Without an atmosphere, there are no clouds and no air to keep water from evaporating. So scientists thought that any water on the Moon would just disappear right away. They believed the Moon was totally dry. But then, in 1961, one physicist had a different idea. He pointed out there could be water on the Moon in special areas called permanently shadowed regions. These are spots on the Moon where the sun doesn't shine, so they stay dark all the time. Water ice could exist in these dark areas because they're extremely cold and the ice wouldn't evaporate. But when astronauts from the Apollo missions went to the Moon, they brought back soil samples, and scientists found no signs of water in them. So everyone went back to thinking that the Moon was completely dry. In the 90s, NASA focused on these shadowed craters and found high concentrations of hydrogen, which meant there could be ice at the Moon's poles. They still weren't certain, so they kept digging and, after a while, found hydrogen trapped inside tiny beads of volcanic glass. Since there are no active volcanoes on the Moon today, which means water probably was present on the Moon when these volcanoes erupted long ago. Plus, there could be way more water back in the early days of our Moon. In 2020, NASA's SOFIA mission showed us what we'd been looking for a really long time. There is water on the Moon after all. It turns out the water is hidden within the grains of lunar dust or sticking to the surface in the sunlit areas of the Moon. So there are no oceans like we have on Earth, but at least there's something. The question remains, how did water even get there? It seems the Moon had a chaotic history back at the time when it was forming, as probably most of the planets and moons in our solar system. So there is some evidence that water came there from comets hitting its surface back in the old days, or maybe even keeps on coming from those that are slamming into the Moon right now. We're talking about a chaotic situation where icy micrometeorites collide with the Moon's surface, and dust then makes an even bigger mess when interacting with the solar wind. But we're waiting to find out more about this. Because, as we all know, when you mention water, you also inevitably talk about life. That's why we want to know more, for instance, about all that ice hidden in polar craters on the Moon. Maybe it can teach us more about how life developed on Earth. Maybe comets brought all the necessary elements here. Then, what if there are some of those elements stuck in the ice on the Moon, too?
What if we built a huge tower on the Moon? A tower that could provide future missions with light, power, and guidance technologies that could help astronauts explore our natural satellite. It's not something from a sci-fi book. It's a novel idea from Honeybee Robotics, one of the brightest space technology companies. The lunar utility navigation with advanced remote sensing and autonomous beaming for energy redistribution, or simply Lunar Saber, is a 328 tall pole. It's capable of holding 1 ton of equipment on top of it. But how could we build such a giant construction? No rocket would be able to hold and land such a giant pole on the Moon. And building such a tower on the lunar surface without already existing infrastructure would be next to impossible. So, Honeybee might use the deployable interlocking actuated bands for linear operations Diablo system. It uses a rolled piece of metal and bends it into a deployable cylindrical structure that can support really heavy payloads. It would be easier to build it on the Moon because gravity there is only 16% of that on Earth. The structure could serve as the base for Lunar Saber. Power is crucial on the Moon, so putting solar panels along the sides of the pole would be super useful. The company is now discussing 2 types of solar panels. The first one is like a yo-yo extended from the top payload holder of the tower. It would envelop the metallic structure and allow access to the sun at all angles. The second option might involve the top part of the tower. It could deploy its booms to hold traditional solar panels and then track the sun. Power supply wouldn't be the only Lunar Saber's task. It would also be able to beam power to other devices, track other devices, and provide communication, light, and energy. Let's talk about these functions in more detail. If one mast of the pole was bathing in sunlight while another was lingering in shadow, the one with excess power would be able to beam power to the one lacking it. Plus, similar power beaming could happen between Lunar Saber and rovers and astronauts in spacesuits. To beam all that power effectively, though, the tower would need to know the precise location of those objects. That's where the second technology would come in. Lunar Saber could use a set of sensors to find and track other objects. Basically, anything in a direct line of sight could be tracked and powered by the tower itself. Lunar Saber could also act as a lunar cell phone tower. It would allow wireless communication in its network. And finally, it would be super helpful for astronauts to actually see where they would be going. Rovers wouldn't need to wait out the 2-week lunar darkness. Floodlights at the top of the tower could provide enough visible light for astronauts and rovers, which would allow them to effectively perform their activities at all times. But guess what? The tower could become even more useful. We could combine several towers in a mesh. It would allow astronauts to communicate more effectively. Plus, power could be beamed even from the other side of the Moon. It would enable 2 main applications that have been a thorn in lunar exploration's side so far: constant communication with Earth and constant supply of solar power. The thing is, explorations on the other side of the Moon are quite tricky, which limits the area of scientific research to the side directly facing Earth. But a strategically placed mesh of Lunar Sabers could allow communication back to Earth, and we would be able to explore the dark side of the Moon. Since at least half of our natural satellite is always lit up, if we placed Lunar Sabers correctly around the surface of the Moon, there would always be at least one bathing in sunlight. That one sunlit tower would then wirelessly transmit power to others in its line of sight. This process would keep going until power was beamed to the main astronaut's base, supplying them with power even in the cold lunar darkness. Unfortunately, at the moment, such technologies look unrealistic. We're not close to having wireless energy transmission over long distances. Even on Earth, we still need to use batteries and wires. It might be easier to launch many satellites into orbit around the Moon than to create a network of giant communication towers.
So Mars has two moons, Phobos and Deimos. And apart from the bizarre shape, there's nothing remarkable about them, except for one thing. Not so long ago, scientists discovered a strange phenomenon on the surface of Phobos, and they still can't find any explanation for it. What is this phenomenon, and what does it tell us about the history of our solar system? Let's find out. American astronomer Asaph Hall discovered Phobos and Deimos back in 1877. Did you know that all the planets in our solar system are named after Greek and Roman deities? For example, Mars or Ares is the famous deity of war. That's why the satellites of this red planet were named after the sons of Ares, Phobos and Deimos. These beautiful names actually have creepy meanings: fear and horror. In 1971, NASA's Mariner 9 telescope took the first pictures. That's how we found out that these guys weren't at all like our moon. They had this weird shape, a strange and unstable orbit. Moreover, there are no other moons in the solar system that move as close to their parent planet as these two. Well, they are its sons after all. But even though they are very close to Mars, if you were standing on the surface of the red planet, you would hardly be able to see them. That's because the curvature of Mars hides Phobos and Deimos from view. Even if you were somewhere on the equator, Phobos would look like an ordinary asteroid to you, and Deimos would look like a star. All because these satellites are basically crumbs compared to our moon. They're the smallest and least bright moons in the entire solar system, which is ironic considering their mighty names. Anyway, it seems that everything should be pretty clear with these two satellites. But nope, there's a problem. You see, scientists reconstruct the history of space based on the traces found on different space objects. Dents, scratches, cracks, all these things can tell us what happened billions of years ago. For a long time, scientists were sure that, just like their Greek prototypes, Phobos and Deimos were twins. But then, NASA's Viking orbiter took new photos of the satellites, and that's when they discovered a significant difference between the two. The entire surface of Phobos was covered with huge grooves. Those were a series of long, deep pits stretching from one end of Phobos to the other. You may say, what's the big deal? All space objects have this kind of stuff on them. And yeah, there are other satellites with similar grooves and scratches, but none of them has as many as Phobos. It's completely covered in grooves, and they're huge, up to 12 miles long and 660 feet wide. And that's not all. Some of these grooves intersect with others. This means that Phobos has experienced not one, but many traumatic events. But what exactly happened to it? Actually, scientists are still not completely sure. However, they have a few ideas, and these theories can tell us not only about the past of Phobos, but also predict its future. Theory 1. Asteroid impact. Well, the first suspect is quite obvious. There's a large, almost 6-mile wide crater on Phobos. It's called Angeline Stickney. It was named after the wife of Asaph Hall, the scientist who discovered the satellites. Adorable. So that's what the first theory sounds like. Once upon a time, an astronomical body crashed into Phobos. The impact was so strong that it left a large crater. And the effect of the collision left a bunch of grooves everywhere on Phobos. It sounds logical at first. However, scientists have noticed a flaw in this theory. They learned that these grooves actually formed not inside the crater, but next to it. So it wasn't a collision that created them. Besides, what about those grooves that intersect with the others? Or is it just a big cosmic coincidence? Well, the search for truth continued. Theory 2. It's all because of space debris. Yes, there's a difference between these two theories. In this case, the grooves aren't a direct consequence of the collision. Rather, it goes something like this. Something crashed into Phobos. This impact caused a bunch of rocks to be thrown into space. Some of them were lost in the universe forever, but others were small enough to be pulled back to Phobos. Passing next to the moon at a steep angle, they would crash into it, jumping away, and so on. And since the gravity of Phobos is very weak, perhaps they couldn't stick to it. In other words, these rocks were continuously pulled toward and pushed off of the satellite for many, many years. This theory explains the intersecting grooves. It's because the rocks were constantly falling into those places. It sounds quite logical, but there's another problem. We don't see any boulders on Mars or on the surface of its moons. But all this debris was supposed to get trapped by gravity and remain somewhere in the planet's orbit. This, or simply become part of Phobos. In other words, if this were true, we'd find evidence of this theory under layers of dust. But that didn't happen, so this explanation didn't satisfy astronomers either. Therefore, they continued to look for the culprit. Maybe the grooves have nothing to do with Stickney Crater at all. Maybe the real culprit is something else, something even more powerful. Could it be Mars itself? Theory 3. Mars is a twist villain. The previous theories imply that Phobos and Deimos were originally pieces of Mars. Like once upon a time they broke away from it and became satellites, just like our moon. But what if that wasn't the case? Observations made by NASA's Mars Global Surveyor show that Phobos and Deimos are made up of elements which are mainly found in meteorites and asteroids. So, what if Phobos and Deimos are asteroids? There's an asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. Given the size, shape, and composition of Phobos and Deimos, scientists have suggested that once upon a time they belonged to this belt. However, one day they flew out of it, and then gravity pulled them to Mars. This phenomenon is called asteroid capture. It's very strange though. Yeah, the asteroid capture isn't uncommon, but these two have been flying next to Mars for what, billions of years? It's weird that their orbits have remained the same. In addition, the atmosphere of Mars is very rarefied, and because of this, it could hardly capture any asteroids. In theory, they should have separated from Mars at the first opportunity. However, this didn't happen. It means that somehow they got stuck, and Mars immediately began to destroy them. Yep, an unexpected twist. In this version, Mars turns out to be a villain. By studying the past, we've found some evidence of future crimes. The mysterious grooves of Phobos could be caused by tidal forces between Mars and Phobos. The Moon and Earth also exchange these, slightly distorting each other. But since Phobos is much closer to Mars, the impact of gravitational forces is much stronger. In other words, the gravity of Mars is gradually destroying Phobos. Every 100 years, the satellite gets 0.7 inches closer to Mars. It also shrinks as much as 6.5 feet, becoming even more fragile and weaker. The smaller it gets, the more the tidal forces impact it, creating strange grooves and scratches on Phobos. Yep, somewhere in 30 to 50 million years, Phobos will either collide with Mars or disintegrate and turn into a bunch of small rocks. And then Mars will also have rings, like Saturn and Neptune. That's why Phobos is called the doomed Martian moon. Anyway, these are all only theories, but the dramatic backstory of Phobos gives us an idea of how dynamic extraterrestrial objects can be. The more we learn about them, the more we discover about the secrets of the origin of not only Mars, but also other objects in our solar system. If one day we really colonize Mars, studying its moons can help us a lot. Let's hope that the upcoming MMX mission will reveal some of the most exciting secrets Mars's moons are hiding.
Prepare for blast-off, because there's some exciting news from NASA coming our way. Care to look into the fascinating world of Saturn's moon, Titan? NASA's groundbreaking Dragonfly rotorcraft lander is set to take off in 2027, looking to explore this mysterious space object. Now let me introduce you to Titan. It's an icy celestial body with an atmosphere filled with nitrogen, and it might even have an underground ocean. Titan is also home to rivers and lakes that flow on its surface. But guess what? They're not filled with water like our lovely planet. They have methane instead. Now let's check out Titan's celestial credentials. It's not just any moon. It's the second largest in our entire solar system. It's only 2% smaller than the biggest moon we have hanging around our neighborhood, which is Jupiter's Ganymede. Titan's size even puts Mercury to shame. And did I mention that its atmosphere is 4 times denser than that of Earth's? Thanks to Titan's lower gravity and thick atmosphere, Dragonfly is the perfect robotic companion to uncover its hidden treasures. Let's move on to Dragonfly, the star of NASA's upcoming mission to Titan. This cosmic drone is not your average explorer. Equipped with a full array of interesting gadgets, Dragonfly is like a flying laboratory, ready to uncover more secrets of Titan. It's the first interplanetary rotorcraft lander probe, designed to take us on an epic journey of discovery. And don't let its name fool you. Dragonfly won't just buzz around aimlessly. This technological marvel is able to glide for several miles between different locations on Titan's surface. Think of it as a cosmic Uber service for scientists. And speaking of technology, Dragonfly is carrying some seriously cool equipment. It'll feature the Drill for Acquisition of Complex Organics, DRACO, instrument, which will help us scoop out material from Titan, while the Dragonfly Mass Spectrometer, DRAMS, will analyze what these samples are made of. But how did we stumble upon Titan? It was March 25th, 1655, when a Dutch astronomer was out there with his telescope, exploring the cosmos. Lo and behold, he spotted something amazing. It was Titan, the biggest moon of Saturn. Fast forward almost 300 years to 1944, when another cool astronomer jumped into the picture. He was doing some experiments with light when he figured out that Titan actually has its very own atmosphere. There's more to this story. In 1979, the Pioneer 11 spacecraft decided to take a joyride through the Saturn system. It confirmed all the cool things scientists had previously speculated about Titan, like its temperature and mass. However, there was one tiny mistake. Those sneaky scientists thought Titan might be the biggest moon in the entire solar system. Oops, wrong guess. Nevertheless, Titan had this mysterious, dense atmosphere that kept everyone on their toes. Now let's zoom in on the 1980s, when the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft make their grand entrance. These cosmic explorers flew past Saturn, and they wanted to get a good look at Titan's surface. That's when Titan decided to play a game of hide-and-seek with them. Its hazy atmosphere made it impossible to see what was going on down there. So all the Voyagers managed to capture were images of a lonely orange world. However, they did spot a fancy blue haze hanging out in the upper atmosphere. Things started to get really exciting in the 1990s. The Hubble Space Telescope joined the party and decided to take some cool snapshots of Titan using special infrared light. This clever device managed to pierce through the haze, and voila! The Hubble images revealed differently colored areas on Titan, almost like a giant cosmic chessboard. We now know that there's even a bright spot as wide as Australia down there. However, despite these fantastic pictures, the mystery of what lay beneath Titan's haze was still unsolved. It was 2004 when the stage was set for Cassini and its European sidekick, the Huygens probe. They were like the ultimate dynamic duo, ready to take on Saturn. Cassini started orbiting the ringed planet and immediately focused its attention on Titan. The big moment finally arrived. On January 14, 2005, the Huygens probe pierced through Titan's atmosphere. During its descent, Huygens collected all sorts of amazing data, snapping images and analyzing the atmosphere. The probe then transmitted this valuable information back to Cassini, which, like a cosmic courier, sent it to us eagerly waiting Earthlings. Over the next 13 years, Cassini flew close to Titan over 100 times, using all sorts of fancy instruments to get a good look at the moon's surface and atmosphere. Scientists could finally confirm that Titan had clouds, lakes, and rivers, and there was also some rain pouring down its surface. Thankfully for us, Titan isn't the only moon in our solar system that could technically harbor life. Take the wondrous moon of Neptune called Triton. For starters, it's the largest moon of Neptune, but it's also a real oddball. Among the many moons out there, only 5 are known to be geologically active. And guess what? Triton is proudly part of this exclusive club. It loves to show off its geysers, which spew nitrogen gas. Picture Triton as a fashionista in an icy ensemble. Its surface is mainly frozen nitrogen, giving it a chill, frosty vibe. You might want to bring a warm coat if you ever visit. Now, you may be wondering how Triton manages to keep warm in such a frigid environment. Well, it's got a secret weapon called tidal forces. Imagine Triton and Neptune engaged in a cosmic dance, creating gravitational friction. This dance seems to generate some heat, helping to warm up Triton's waters. With all this talk about heat, you might be getting excited about the possibility of life on Triton. However, finding life on this moon is about as likely as finding a unicorn riding a skateboard. Voyager 2, the only mission to ever fly by Triton, made its journey back in 1989. And if you're hoping for another mission to Triton anytime soon, well, let's just say the stars aren't aligning in our favor, literally. The window for a mission to Triton opens up only once every 13 years, because our planet and Jupiter need to be perfectly aligned for the landing to work. Scientists would use the gravitational pull of the largest planet in our solar system to safely deliver a probe on Triton. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or should I say, the polar bear. It's so cold on Triton that hopes for life to survive unfrozen are about as slim as a toothpick. Sorry, potential little microbes. You might need a few extra sweaters to set up shop down there. Even though Triton may not be the most welcoming place for life, it's still a celestial gem worth exploring. Scientists also believe Triton wasn't always a part of Neptune's crew. As it turns out, Triton was most likely just minding its business, hanging around aimlessly in the distant Kuiper Belt. Along came Neptune with its mighty gravitational pull and snatched Triton right out, officially making it a moon of its own. Just like our trusty satellite, Triton is also stuck in a permanent face-off with Neptune. One side of Triton always has its eyes locked on the planet. As for this amazing moon's fate, things aren't looking so good in the long run. It's already getting closer and closer to Neptune every day. Why is that, you might wonder? The problem is with those tidal interactions, which are playing some cosmic tricks on Triton. They're causing its orbit to wither away, like a slow-motion dance towards Neptune. Scientists predict that in about 3.6 billion years, Triton will cross an invisible boundary. If these current calculations are correct, there are 2 possible scenarios. It'll either have a collision with Neptune's atmosphere, or it might just break up into tiny pieces. If the latter happens, an all-new ring system would form around Neptune, just like the one we see around Saturn nowadays. Triton is not the only satellite that might end up this way. Phobos, one of the Martian moons, is likely to disintegrate too, and sooner, in 30 to 50 million years.
That's it for today. So hey, if you pacified your curiosity, then give the video a like and share it with your friends. Or if you want more, just click on these videos and stay on the bright side.